Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Starkey with Ensemble TV, and thank you so much for watching my video. Just to let you guys know, I have just recently opened a vintage shop here in the Metro Atlanta area, and we've been open now for about 2 months, and we're doing really well. But I really just wanted to take the time to, just kind of create this channel and get this channel going, to, educate some people who might be interested in vintage shopping and share some information as we come across the information here in our store. Just to introduce myself, again, my name is Starkey. I am a North Carolina native. Live here in the Metro Atlanta area in Griffin, Georgia, which is about 45 minutes south of Atlanta. And I'm the owner and founder of Ensemble Stores. And Ensemble is a vintage shop that houses vintage and retro apparel for men and women. So, let's get started. Today, I really wanted to, just kind of touch base on 10 interesting facts that I want to share with you guys for those of you who are interested in wearing vintage clothing. I know that vintage clothing is a hot commodity right now. A lot of people have already jumped on the bandwagon, but there are still some people who are a little iffy about those things. So I really just want to share 10 interesting facts about wearing vintage clothing and shopping for vintage clothing that you might want to consider before making your first purchase and before going completely vintage. So let's get started. The first thing is that you will not necessarily look like an old person when you wear vintage clothing. All right. That is the very first thing I want to cover because I feel like a lot of people don't wear vintage because they're afraid of looking like an old person or they are afraid of, not being able to style the clothing. If you think about how in previous decades, let's take the 90s, for example, okay? You have those clothing that look, that were made for older people, and then you have those pieces that were made for younger people, all right? It's the same with every decade. So you can wear those vintage pieces, you can, rock those cool and funky vintage pieces without looking like an old person necessarily. Now, if you're really, really artsy and you're really confident in your style, you can take some of those pieces that were made for old people and, just rock them yourself. I see a lot of, people doing this. They'll take, some 1960s jeans, the high-waisted jeans for men with some suspenders and throw them on and, throw on a nice, hat and, there you go. A lot of girls do this with the long floral dresses. They'll throw that on with some funky, sunglasses and throw their hair up in a messy bun, and then that's their outfit for today. So it really depends on who you are and how confident you are in your ability to style yourself. All right. The second interesting fact is that you should not expect to find trendy items in a vintage shop. Okay, that is a huge misconception that people tend to have. People often go to vintage shops and they're looking for what's in, and so when you're shopping at a vintage shop, the whole purpose of shopping at a vintage shop is to purchase what's not in, is to purchase what nobody's wearing anymore, to purchase those few items that are left from previous decades that nobody has. So if you are a person who is, who anticipates, going into a vintage shop and, keeping your same style, which might be modern, but then, looking for the vintage version of it, you might be able to find it there, but, that's something that you might want to consider stepping out of, considering that you're at a vintage shop, and that's the whole point, right? And so, outside of that, I mean, you might be better off shopping at a mall instead of a vintage shop. Don't expect to find those pieces at a vintage shop because it will be very, very difficult for you to find. The third thing is that plus size people can also wear vintage clothing. That is something that a lot of people that I've met, especially women, they're like, oh, I know you guys don't have my size. Like, you guys sell vintage clothing, you don't have my size. And I totally understand why they would think that because, before now, vintage clothing were usually small, especially when you're talking about clothing from the 20s all the way up to about the 70s. Clothing were small. People walked more. People, were a lot more active. Our food came from a different source, and we don't have the same. We didn't have the same things in our food then that we do now. In the 70s, for example, people danced more. You understand what I'm saying? And so that's one thing, but also, there were also some plus size people in those decades as well. There were some people who you just pretty much had health issues, maybe, and they were just plus size. I mean, although it's very far and in between, but those people did exist back in the day. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But also, we're now in 2020, okay? So vintage clothing are clothing that is between 20 and 100 years old, all right? So we're already in, I'm sorry, we're in 2021, sorry. So considering that we're in 2021, that means that everything from 2001 back to 1921 is considered vintage, okay? So you might not be able to find anything as a plus size person from the 1920s, but you should definitely be able to find some 80s, 90s, and some early 2000s pieces that are plus size and that will fit you, all right? And that's one thing that we take pride here at Ensemble is that we do carry a lot of vintage plus size items. The fourth thing is that vintage clothing is luxury clothing, but for less. All right. A lot of people tend to think that, vintage clothing is expensive. All right. And it's not expensive. It should be expensive. The proper way to go about, pricing vintage clothing is to add 100 years after every 20 years since that item was made. But nobody does that anymore because if we did, then vintage clothing wouldn't be affordable for people. So you have stores like Ensemble and other vintage shops, throughout the world who have made it affordable for common people to also be able to purchase vintage clothing. And so considering that vintage clothing is often priced less as what it would usually cost to buy something of that type of item from that designer brand new out of a department store today, you're better off buying a vintage piece than what you are buying a piece out of the department store or out of the mall. All right, let alone the difference in quality. Okay, today we're dealing with a lot of fast fashion. Back in the day, quality was like much more, higher, much higher. And, people just kind of took their time. There were a lot of things that were handmade. There were a lot of things that were made in small batches, so you definitely want to get your luxury pieces, from your vintage shops instead of spending, X amount of dollars at the mall or at department stores paying, a much higher cost for something that's of much less quality. And I'm just looking at my notes here. Vintage clothing are fun and interesting, and it increases your confidence. That's another interesting fact. Whenever you are wearing vintage clothing, first of all, you're wearing something that nobody else has. You're wearing something that's not in anymore. You're wearing something that most people are not even interested in anymore. Okay? So if you're able to wear that and you wear it with confidence and you hold your head up high and you know that you are fly, then that's all you have to worry about. 85% of a person's look is their confidence. Only 15% of it is what they're actually wearing. You can literally wear jeans and t-shirt and walk around with your head up high like you know that you are looking fly today, like you know that you're cute, and you're going to get a lot more attention than somebody who's wearing a $9,000 dress. You understand what I'm saying? And with no confidence. So, you definitely want to, make sure that you have your confidence when you're rocking those vintage pieces, because it's going to increase your confidence, and that's going to allow you to get more creative with your fashion, with your wardrobe, and with your outfits every single day. The next thing that I have is that vintage fashion is the forefront of the fashion industry, and a lot of people don't realize this. A lot of people don't understand this. But if you think about what's happening right now, let's just think about what's on the runway right now. Okay, if you go to the mall, you're probably going to find, if you, let's say you're going shopping for jeans. Okay, most of the jeans nowadays are, you know, being sold like with a very rugged look, with a very, old, worn look, right? That's because people who are already a part of the vintage culture are wearing those jeans. And so the designers are now picking up on it and they're releasing those items, into the mainstream fashion industry. If you, I mean, you can really consider anything, even outside of jeans, with skirts. Like I don't know if you guys have noticed the skirts with the buttons going down the middle. Those came out in the 70s. Now they're back out again in 2021. It's only because people in the vintage, industry, the vintage fashion industry, were already wearing it. It was a thing for them. So therefore, the mainstream fashion industry picked it up and released it back out. So whenever you're buying, this is interesting. Whenever you're buying things from the mall and you're going, shopping for new clothing, you're actually purchasing something that's not in. You understand what I'm saying? Because whatever that is in has already been released in the vintage world and it's already been worn. And so, therefore, it's now being released in the mainstream fashion industry. And you can do more research on that yourself, but that's exactly how it goes. Another thing I wanted to mention, number seven, is that there is a vintage piece for everybody. There is a vintage piece for everybody, no matter what your style is. Okay, no matter what your swag is, you can also wear vintage. Okay, if you are a homeboy who likes to wear hoodies and baggy jeans, then tap into the 90s. Like, that's when hoodies and baggy jeans became the most popular. Okay, if you are a female who likes to wear, nice dresses, you can go. I mean, you can wear any sort of dress. They have dresses for old ladies. There are dresses for, younger ladies. Like, you can really explore. But there is a vintage piece for everybody, no matter who you are, even if you're not even into vintage. There are some pieces that are even timeless, that were made back in the 20s and that look like they should be on the rack in a department store today, because they're just timeless pieces. So there is a vintage piece for everybody, no matter who you are, no matter what your style is. Okay. The number eight, it is totally okay. It is completely okay to mix decades. Just because you're wearing a vintage outfit and you're wearing a 1970s jacket, it doesn't mean you have to have on bell bottoms and platform shoes. You don't have to be vintage from head to toe. Okay? Your vintage piece can actually be your accent piece. It can be your key piece within your outfit. You can have on a nice, 1970s vintage jacket, and just a denim shirt from the early 2000s, some skinny jeans, and some stilettos. Like, you can do that. Like, you don't have to go vintage from head to toe. Like, you can mix and match. You can do whatever you want. The more you mix and match, the more you're going to be able to enjoy your vintage piece. So keep that in mind. And number nine is that there's vintage apparel for every occasion. Okay? A lot of people come into our store and they say, "Oh, I like this, but where would I wear it?" You don't have to plan. Like, we're living in a day and time where, you don't have to get you. I'm sorry, you don't have to, like, only buy a nice dress to wear to a formal event. Like, you can literally wear, a nice dress to the grocery store. Like, seriously, if you feel good, if it's gonna make you feel good, then do it. Like, back in the day, if you watch some of these movies, like, those ladies and those guys dressed up walking through town, going to the bank. Like, they got dressed to go and handle business. They got dressed to go to the grocery store. Like, they got dressed to go shopping. You understand what I'm saying? Like, people just don't dress up anymore. And so, I feel like a lot of people tend to hold back on buying those really nice pieces that they really like because they feel like, oh, where would I wear this? People do not have the confidence to get dressed anymore. And I feel like that should change. So that's number nine. Number 10 is that vintage apparel can easily be repurposed. This is one thing that I absolutely love. I have this long blue Dickies piece, right? It's like a cotton Dickies piece. I don't have it here with me, but it's a cotton Dickies piece, and I wear it as a long jacket. Like, it's just very flowy. It's very thin. You can wear it during the spring, during the fall, even during the summer if you want. It's not heavy, and every time I wear it, people compliment me. And then so I tell people, I'm like, well, do you know what this is? And they're like, no. And I'm like, this is actually it's actually a janitor uniform dress from the 90s that I just wear. I just wear it open as like a long jacket, and I just throw it on as a little accent piece and I go from there. Just the other day I had a girl to come in and she saw a nurse cape and from the 40s, and she looked at me. She was like, do you know what this is? I'm like, yeah, I know exactly what this is. And so she says, well, why is it here? Like, this is a vintage fashion store. Like, this is a nurse cape. And I'm like, it can easily be repurposed. Like, it's a navy blue cape. I'm going to show you a picture of it, but it's a navy blue nurse cape. And yeah, it is a nurse cape from the 40s, but it does not mean that you can't throw it on with some high, leather boots and some long, leather gloves during the winter and rock it going to wherever you're going. Like, throw on some shades and rock it. You know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like repurposing vintage is such a big thing, and it's such a big deal, and it really changes the outlook on fashion. You understand what I'm saying? So anyway, those are the 10 things that I wanted to share with you guys. I hope this video was helpful in any way. But I really just wanted to, just kind of share those things. And, as you prepare to purchase your, first vintage piece, or if you are looking to maybe, extend your vintage wardrobe, like, those are things that you want to consider. Don't be afraid to get out there. Don't be afraid to create. Like, create. Don't be afraid to do it, regardless of who says what. Like, it doesn't even matter. Just create it, wear it, have fun, feel good, do good, and that's it. Anyway, you guys, again, my name is Starkey here with Ensemble TV. If you're in the Atlanta area, feel free to stop by our vintage shop. It's called Ensemble. It's located at 114 North Hill Street in Griffin, Georgia, which is about 45 minutes south of Atlanta, 50 minutes north of Macon. If you're not in the Atlanta area, we are working on building our online store. We do have some items that are already there. So you want to check us out at www.ensemblestores.com. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time. Bye.